Hello and welcome to an episode of Star Trek CCG 2nd Edition Deck Clinic. A while ago there was a post about To Boldly Go and how that set is still widely available while other prices have gone up quite immensely. And I commented saying there wasn't much that a tournament player would want from that set apart from the odd dilemma, but it was mostly focused on the Enterprise series, and if you weren't interested in that, then there weren't too many cards that you could use to improve your existing decks. So I thought, actually, what did I play back then? It was a strange period because, as far as I remember, To Boldly Go was released in the summer of 2006, and it was immediately followed by the Captain's Log released only a few months later. So I looked up my decks from that era, and I found that there was a big event in Germany called the Grand Prix, a big event, a convention that went a full weekend, and that had lots of fun events, but also regular constructed tournaments, and it was a very prestigious event. So I went back to the time machine and had a look at the deck that I played at the 2006 Grand Prix. Turns out To Boldly Go had been released in the summer, and Captain's Log was also available back then, and it was also tournament legal because the deck I'm going to show you had one card from Captain's Log as well. So, which cards from To Boldly Go did I choose to build my deck around then? Well, turns out there were two of them, and they are two unlikely bedfellows. One of them is Malcolm Reed. So, of course, Enterprise was the new thing, and at 4 cost, he's quite expensive, but he's going to work nicely with the other card that we're going to pick, which is Dabo. Dabo, an event that plays on table, and it interacts with the opponent's dilemma pile. The first thing that stands out is that in order to play Dabo, you need to have 3 Ferengi personnel. So we are going to build a Ferengi deck. So we are going to use a bunch of Ferengi. I'll go through them later on. But for now, the most important point here is that we need a decent number of Ferengi in order to get 3 of them into play relatively quickly, so we can play Dabo. So let's ignore all these Ferengi guys for the moment, and let's focus on what Dabo actually does. Dabo reads, stop your Dabo girl to name a number. Choose an opponent to shuffle his or her dilemma pile and then reveal the top card of that pile. If its cost matches the number you named, place it under your non-headquarters mission. So, in the end, it's good old gambling. You get to announce a number, your opponent shuffles the pile, and then if you hit the lucky number, then you can put a dilemma under one of your missions. Of course, getting through missions and overcoming dilemmas is the most important aspect in the game, and what we're doing here is we are going to go all in. That is, we are trying to build a deck that is not bothered at all with overcoming dilemmas, but rather not facing them at all. So ideally we're going to play Dabo until our missions are stacked with dilemmas and we can complete them without any resistance from our opponent. Now, with the average attributes of a person, let's say they have cunning or strength of 6 around that, you usually need 5 or 6 personnel in order to complete a 30 or 35 point mission. Getting 6 dilemmas under each mission is almost impossible. The game simply won't take that long and you will have lost long before. So we are trying to do something different. We are trying to only stack 2 dilemmas under each mission for a total of 6 dilemmas with 2 under each of the 3 missions we're going to complete. And then we should be good to go. So let's have a look and see how that works out in detail. We have played a couple of Ferengi. There are about 1/3 of the cards of the deck that are Ferengi, so after drawing 4 or 5 cards, you should have about a 70% chance already to have drawn into 3 Ferengis. So you can usually drop them relatively quickly. And then you want to play Dabo. For that, we need Dabo girls. Now, around the time this deck was legal, there were 2 non-aligned Dabo girls. They also came out in Too Boldly Go. They were Miss Sarda and Aluura, both non-aligned, both 1 cost, with relatively useless skills. Miss Sarda has Honor and Anthropology, Aluura has Honor and Acquisition. Very mediocre stats, so clearly they are not meant to complete missions. We are only use them for the game text and for the fact that they are Dabo girls. They have nice abilities. Miss Sarda, for example, lets you play another gamble. You can name a card type. Opponent reveals a random card from hand. If it is the announced card type, you get to draw a card. So mostly you'll use this to name personal, because that's the most obvious card type in 2nd edition to use. And Aluura also has another ability here. Each player reveals the top card of his or her deck. The player who revealed the card with the highest cost may take that card into hand. In the case of a tie, both players draw a card. So really, we are not concerned with maybe letting our opponent draw a card, but rather cycling through our deck as quickly as possible, because we will be spending a lot of turns just sitting at home doing nothing while our opponent is already out and doing missions. So these are 2 Dabo girls that we can get out. Both of these girls are in the deck twice in order to increase our chances of drawing into them. And I said there is 1 card from Captain's Log in there. It's not one of the fancy Voyager characters or anything like that. Rather, it's a movie personal. It's Martia, the shapeshifter. She has better skills, she's more expensive, but we are only concerned about her game text. It's an order, and it lets you copy 1 skill and 1 keyword from one of your personal presents. So we are going to use it to copy the Dabo girl trait from either Aluura or Miss Sarda. So ideally, we have 3 Dabo girls who can spin the wheel each turn and hopefully get our dilemma under. Now, what number should we pick? At that time, I remember suggesting choosing either 2 or 3 cost, because a lot of the good dilemmas back then were 2 or 3 cost. Personal Duty was a staple at the time. 3 cost, you had Gom 2 Shockwave, you had Rogueborg Ambush. In Reflections, you had Hard Time and Full Security Alert and Unknown Microorganism. So depending on the meta, you could pick 2 or 3, or maybe also 1, if that was something you were concerned with, because there were command decisions and Kolaran Raiders and all those things. It also depends a little bit on what you've seen with the failed Dabo attempts, because sometimes you can make an educated guess whether that dilemma pile is a generic attrition pile or whether it has some strategy that is likely to have a lot of dilemmas of the same cost or in the same vein. Okay, so we'll be sitting at home at Ferenginar playing Dabo, and once we have a couple of dilemmas under, we can move out and solve. How do we solve? Our puny Ferengi don't have the raw attribute numbers in order to make it through a mission with only 2 dilemmas under. So we will be using Ferengi tricks to turn our androids into overdrive. When I say androids, actually I mean a Borg personal. This is Morik, a universal Borg from the Necessary Evil set. He has stats that aren't anything to write home about, 4, 5, 5, but where he really shines is his game text. The cost of the event in your core with the highest cost is added to this personal's attributes. So if you have a 3 cost event in your core, he can already be a respectable cunning 8, but that's not where we are going to stop. We are going to abuse this with the highest cost event in the game. At least at the point, I'm not sure whether any virtual cards at this point are more expensive, but back then it was this event, Rule of Acquisition 141. It costs 9, so there is really no way to play this on a regular turn. Either you have generated extra counters with at what cost or whatever else you find, but usually you don't want to pay retail for this. Rather, we are going deep into Ferengi tricks. Now, Ferengi have a very nice mechanic that turns many people off because it seems complicated. It is a little bit complicated, but once you've got the hang of it, it is a very powerful mechanic. And I'm going to show you what you are going to do. So, let's have a look at the Ferengi that we included. We're really looking at one specific guy here, and that is Quark, True Ferengi, released in the Strange New World set that introduced the Ferengi affiliation. Quark has a nice ability. When you play this personal, you may download a card, any card, and place that card beneath your Ferenginar. The rest of the game text is not important. So we have 3 copies of him in the deck. We play him, we download a card, and that is going to be the Rule of Acquisition 141. Hopefully we haven't drawn into all our copies before we've got a Quark. Otherwise we can't download it and have to find another way to make it work. But usually this works out. You have a Quark before you have drawn all your copies of Rule 141, which means this card is downloaded and it is placed under Ferenginar. I'm placing it face up right now. I think technically the correct way is to do it face down, but it doesn't really matter. So the card is under Ferenginar. It doesn't do anything at the moment, but what we are going to do later then is play another rule. For example, Rule 76. Rule 76 looks like a useless card. To play this event, you must command 3 Ferengi personnel, place in your core. Order, return a rule to its owner's hand. So, we can play it in our core, and then we can bounce other rules that we've played to our hand. That can be useful, but it doesn't do much on its own. What we really want is the fact that it's a rule and it costs nothing and we can play it in our core. And then we are going to use the game text on Rule 141. At the start of each of your turns, if this event is beneath your Ferenginar, you may exchange it with a rule in your core. So, once we have enough dilemmas from our Daboing, and we feel that we are good to complete a mission, we can then, at the beginning of our turn, exchange this card for a rule in our core, and then we suddenly have a 9-cost rule in our core, which means that the good non-aligned Borg, Morik, is now a whopping +9 to his attributes, putting him on Cunning and Strength 14. So, with 2 copies of him, remember he's universal, with 2 copies of him we already have attributes of 28, and then we only need a single Ferengi personnel to complete our missions. And the missions we've chosen here are as follows. They are Deliver Supplies, Kressari Rendezvous, and Runabout Search. All of these missions can be done by 3 personnel. You need 2 copies of Morik and Kol. They have all the skills and attributes to complete Runabout Search for 35 points. They also have all the skills to complete Deliver Supplies for 30 points. And for our space mission, we will leave Kol back at the planet's surface and either use Bok or there's also Lurin. Both of these guys have the officer and double treachery required to complete Kressari Rendezvous for 30 points. Now, the order in which you do the missions is usually doing a Runabout Search first, because it has game text that allows you, upon completion, to take a Federation affiliation or Bajoran affiliation personnel from your discard pile into hand and place it aboard your ship, so we get to play a personal for free. Hopefully, by the time we complete this mission, we have managed to get Mardah in our discard pile. Mardah is a Bajoran Dabo girl. So if we can do Runabout Search first, and we've managed to get her into the discard pile, we have a 4th Dabo girl to help us spin the wheel and increase our chances of completing the next mission as well. So that's the basic engine. You play Dabo girls, you get a couple of dilemmas for free, and once you're confident that you have enough dilemmas under your missions and your opponent doesn't have anything on table to increase the number of dilemmas they can draw, then you just fly over to your missions. You complete with a micro team consisting of 3 personnel, Morik and Kol for the 2 planets, and Morik plus either Lurin or Bok for the space mission. If you've paid attention, the missions only add up to 95 points, which is why there are a couple of hand weapons, bathlets. So it received errata later on, but at the time it was a 0-cost card. You could just play it without any cultural enforcement. So all you needed is 1 bathlet that you can ditch upon completing Kressari Rendezvous, and then that put you to 100 points. And if you were really fast, you also had the chance of getting 10 bonus points if you complete a space mission before your opponent does. Because apart from Ferenginar, we also run Earth, Humanity's Home, the Enterprise era headquarters. It says when you complete a space mission, if no other space mission has been completed, so by an opponent, score 10 points. So that's another option to get to 100, but usually you will not be faster than your opponent solving missions, at least the first mission. So, why is Earth in there? Because we also want to play Malcolm Reed. He seems expensive at cost 4. Sure, he has nice skills, he even has intelligence, which could help us get past Rogue Ambush, but we are not concerned with facing Rogue Ambush, we want to overcome it. What Malcolm Reed does is he gets played, and then on the same turn we are immediately going to use his order. Place this personnel on the bottom of your deck to reveal the top card of an opponent's dilemma pile. If that dilemma costs 3 or less, place it beneath your non-headquarters mission. So you can do this, for example, after a failed Dabo attempt. Dabo is an order. Let's say you've picked the number 3. Your opponent shuffled the dilemma pile. They reveal the 2-cost dilemma. You are unlucky because you failed the Dabo, but then Malcolm Reed is there to at least exploit the situation. He goes on the bottom of the deck, and then you get an extra dilemma. It's expensive, but remember we are only going for about 6 dilemmas in total. So if you use them once or twice, then that's probably all you need. And that's how the deck plays out. You get dilemmas under the missions, and you micro-team them. In order to get around, we are using the Mercenary Ship. It costs 5. What is important here is that it has range 8. Range 8 is important because we want to get from Ferenginar to our first mission for 2 plus 2 is 4, and then back. That's 8. And when we come home, there's another mercenary ship waiting. It's a universal ship. And then we can move to deliver supplies and Kressari Rendezvous for another 8, meaning that ideally we can do our whole 100-point shenanigans in one single turn. I said we're going to spend a lot of time sitting at home, just building up our forces until we can do this 100-point turn. It's important to do it in one turn because the rule 1 for 1 is such a juicy target that it usually won't survive a turn when your opponent has the chance to interfere with some kind of interrupt to destroy it. You might get lucky and get a second turn with the pumped Morik stats, but most of the time that doesn't happen. You either get your 100-point turn or you don't. So let's have a look at some of the other cards that were included. The Battlet we said we need for the extra 5 points. Quark is important to download rule 141. Birta is not important at all. You could replace him with any other cheap Ferengi. He has game text that can help you cycle, but really it could be any other Ferengi with preferably a gold or silver star. Brunt, now he is important because if an opponent commands more events in his or her core than you, return this personnel to his owner's hand to destroy an event. This is something that we need because your opponent might have dilemma manipulation like machinations or stir crazy or complications or stuff like that. So as long as our opponent has more events than we do, we can use Brunt to destroy an event. That usually means that your opponent needs to have 2 events in his core, because we can get rid of all our own events apart from the rule 1 for 1 that we need for that turn. But with everything apart from rule 1 for 1, we can actually wait. We have Dabo, which we need early on, but the other rules we don't have to put on the table. So if our opponent has 2 events, we can usually destroy one of them. So Brunt is a key card. If there are other events on the table after you've destroyed some with Brunt, there's also an event here called Worth the Price. Destroy an event, the player who commands that event may draw cards equal to its cost. We don't care about letting our opponent draw more cards. The important part is that we got rid of the dilemma manipulation that they can use to draw into more terrible stuff that we can't possibly overcome. So between Brunt and Worth the Price, you should be able to get rid of the dilemma manipulation that your opponent has in play. There's also Ishka. Ishka has the ability to examine the top card of your deck and exchange it with a card beneath your Ferenginar. This is only important in a couple of cases. If you get her out early, you can, for example, check and see if the top card of your deck is rule 141 and then put it under Ferenginar. Or if one of your cards that you need to complete a mission has accidentally ended up under Ferenginar. This could happen by playing Call. You may place the top card of your Drawdeck beneath Ferenginar. You may place that. You can do that depending on the cards that you have drawn. You can decide to put a card under Ferenginar, and then if you have Ishka out as well, then you can get the card from Ferenginar and put it on top of your deck. So depending on which card you have drawn, you might use his ability or not. Usually you download 141 with Quark and then you're good. Sovak has the ability to discard a card from hand to examine a number of cards from the top of your deck equal to the discarded card's cost, then replace them in any order. What we can do with him, we can discard a card from hand. So we can, for example, discard Mardah, get her into the discard pile so we can later rescue her from Runabout Search. That's one of the ways of getting Mardah into the discard pile. Another option would of course be to simply draw up to more than 7 cards and then discard down to 7 at the end of the turn. Or you can use Delicate Negotiations. That's the Ferengi take on the generic cycle card. All of the affiliations in the original set have a discard a card from hand to draw 2 cards card there. The Ferengi version is a bit different. You also discard a card from hand, but then you can spend 2 additional counters. So you get the cost in a more flexible, or you get the benefit in a more flexible form. You don't have to use it to spend, you don't have to spend it on drawing 2 cards. You can also use it to increase the number of counters you can play in one turn. So you can potentially play a ship and Quark for 9 counters total in a turn. And this also lets you cycle Mardah into the discard pile. Lurin and Bok we said we need for their officer plus 2 treachery combination in order to complete the Kressari Rendezvous. And then there's only one more card I haven't mentioned so far, and that is another rule, rule number 6. This is a tricky card but a very powerful one. Essentially what it does is when you've played rule number 6, you are no longer allowed to spend counters to draw cards. Once that is played, you can no longer draw more cards. What you do is instead you can stop Ferengi personal that you already have in play and draw a card for each personal you stop. This can potentially be much more powerful than spending counters to draw cards, but the problem is you then have to play with the cards that you have in your hand. And if you want to draw if your personal somehow die, for example, they run into dilemmas and they die, and you have no more Ferengi personal that you can stop, then you cannot replenish your hand because you're not allowed to draw. That's where the other rule comes in handy, rule number 76, because that lets you bounce one of our rules to hand. So we can take rule 6 to hand and allow us to draw cards again. So rule 76, rule 6, rule 141 are more or less the 101 of Ferengi headquarters, hand size, manipulation thing. You can use rule 141 for lots of other things. For example, there is a nice dilemma later on, Gorgon, which allows you to discard a card from hand, and if your opponent cannot discard a card with at least that cost, all the personal are stopped. So if you have a 9 cost card to discard, chances are you're good for a complete stop of your opponent's team. So in the end, that was a deck that was primarily meant to be fun. You have Dabo girls and Ferengi hanging out at Quark's bar, playing Dabo, sometimes hitting the jackpot and getting a dilemma under, other times just sitting there and being miserable. Sometimes Markham Reed, sitting at Earth, can support that strategy by getting an extra dilemma under, but in the end it's a gamble. If you have an idea of what the meta is like and you know what kind of dilemmas you can expect, then chances are you can get 6 dilemmas under, and that's usually enough. When I say 6 dilemmas, usually when there are 2 under, you can then just use Markham Reed to peek at the top card. If it's a 3 cost dilemma or less, it goes under. If it costs more than 4, that means your opponent can draw it, but they can't play it. And even if they can draw a dilemma, oftentimes it doesn't do much. If it's a 0 cost dilemma like Timescape, you get through. Or Skeleton Crew. Doesn't matter. You get through because it only affects the next attempt. If it's a 1 cost dilemma, it still has to be a 1 cost dilemma that they can actually play. So if you draw Kalaran Raiders, that won't help you at Kressari. If you want to go overboard, you can add things like Tampering with Time, which would let you peek at the top 3 or bottom 3 cards of an opponent's dilemma pile, and then just look at what's coming next, arrange them in the way you want to face them on the turn you go out and attempt your missions. But that's another event, an expensive event that you have to play. You have to stop Martia or Markham Reed in order to use it. But it would also support that whole strategy. In the end, I played this deck in a 6-round tournament and I went 5-1. I don't remember exactly what the game I lost in the 6 rounds was, but it was good enough to get me into the Final 4. And unfortunately, I lost in the semi-finals to a Romulan Ferengi deck, that used Alexander Rozhenko to download lots of events, and I ran into a deck that ran heavy dilemma manipulation. So it downloaded Destined Reset, Machinations, and all that stuff, and it was just too much to get rid of with Brunt. I managed to get through a mission, maybe even a second, but at one point I had to attempt without being able to eliminate all the dilemma manipulation, and then I faced into a dilemma that just killed one of my Moriks, and from then on there just wasn't anything I could do to recover. So that was more or less the perfect storm of an opponent. But apart from that, in 7 games, 5 wins and 2 losses for a more or less fun deck, that was quite acceptable for me, and it was probably one of the moments I enjoyed most when I played a deck that I hadn't seen anyone try before. I hadn't seen anything like that on the Decipher boards, so it was, at least I think it was, an original idea, and it was something that people didn't expect. Some people tried the new Enterprise affiliation. A lot of people tried Cadets, which is a super successful deck for that era, and I think there were also the first Voyager decks that already came out then, and those Voyager decks were insanely powerful, and even for the next several expansions they remained powerful and stayed in the top tier of tournament decks back then. I'll put the deck list in the description, and if you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask me. Until next time, bye bye.